Good afternoon, everybody. Some of you I've seen earlier today. It was wonderful to worship here at Mount Olivet this morning as a guest preacher. I'm Pastor John Jacobs, a retired pastor of the ELCA and of the Greater Milwaukee Synod. And I want to welcome all of you today. This is the second of a fishbowl dialogue that we've been able to put together with an interfaith group that has responded to the Hamas attack into Israel and then this horrible war that Israel is waging against the Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank. And within the faith community around Milwaukee, our response has been varied and many. And late last fall, there was a coalition. Well, immediately after October 7th, there was a coalition that was established called the Wisconsin Coalition for Justice in Palestine. Lots of organizations are a part of that group. And that group began to fashion a response to what Israel is doing on the occupied lands. And there are a group of Christians that got together, and in the history, most of you maybe, how many are a part of the ELCA, I guess the Lutheran Church? How many are not? Okay, and other communities that we have. So in the ELCA, the Greater Milwaukee Synod, we've been working for years to divest and to boycott Israel, and so a lot of us have been involved in that because of what I would call the apartheid regime, and that had to do because we have lots of faith brothers and sisters in the area in Palestine, and so with that, then we were able to gather in response and develop a group that was called the Wisconsin Christians for Justice in Palestine. And I think that we've had, with that group, 3 vigils over time. One was in front of Redeemer Lutheran Church on the Avenue, a couple at Cathedral Square. And then out of that effort came a real effort to try to bridge the differences between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And the hardest thing was to work with a Jewish community, a rabbi in particular, that would help pen a document that we could all sign that would be in response to the war. And we were able to do that. And Rabbi McCall Wohl from Congregation Shir Hadash over on the east side was a partner in that. And so we've stepped through this process together. And one of the things we did was then to bring the story to people who would take the time, like today, and learn about how our faith communities think about the war, what we are doing internally, and to answer questions that you might have as you've worked through it in your own mind. And so today, it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce our 3 panelists. And the first one I will introduce is my pastor, the Reverend Lisa Bates Froyland at Redeemer Lutheran Church. And Pastor Lisa has been at Redeemer for 10 years? 13 years. And it is, like I said, our home congregation now. And she will tell you a bit more of her story that's very important. Then I'd like to introduce Mr. Holtman Atta, and he is a part of the Islamic Society of Greater Milwaukee, on the board, past president, very active in the community, very knowledgeable. Palestine is his home, born there. And you'll find Holtman very supportive of our work all over the community. And so I'm grateful always for the partnership we have with with that part of our religious community. The third person then is new to the group, but a wonderful addition, and that's Jess Annabelle. And Jess is active in a group called Jewish Voices for Peace. You may or may not have heard about that, but it is an organization that's very active through the United States and helps us build the community in terms of interfaith understanding and support as we all work for a common humanity. And Jess is just finishing up her master's, I think, in architecture.
First year of my master's in urban planning.
Yeah, right. And she's also a realtor.
Yes.
So you'll hear a part of her story as well. So I want to welcome you and welcome our guest, and let's get on with our presentation. There will be a series of questions, 3 questions that the presenters will answer in turn, and we hope that the questions will help you understand them and their perspectives, and then we'll have time for questions and answers as we proceed with the next hour, hour and a half. So the first question we're going to ask each one to share with us is how they personally were shaped, how their upbringing, their personal experience, and their faith identity shaped their perception of history and the conflict that we experience in the Holy Land, and how it has led them to cry or demand for a lasting peace in this land that we call holy. So I'm just going to go right down the line, and Pastor Lisa, you're on first.
No, I didn't want to be first.
You always say that.
I was born and raised in first Little Falls, Minnesota, and later Wadena, Minnesota, 2 small towns in central Minnesota of about 4,000, 5,000 each. And I was raised in the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church. And I am the great-granddaughter of 2 Methodist pastors, one of whom was very familiar with the Scofield Bible. And the presentation of scriptures, especially the books of Daniel and Revelation, in such a way that the end times had a lot to do with what would happen in this geographical region right now, which is seeing such destruction. So as I was raised to think about this Holy Land as a place where it was all sand, all sand there, and the place where Jesus was born, and that's about all that I knew of those areas. We have these place names, these geographical names, and the Bible stories that are attached to them. But I was raised in a completely either Christian or agnostic kind of upbringing. I did not meet anyone who was Jewish until I was in college. And I didn't meet anyone who was Muslim also probably until graduate school. And so I really, when I was growing up as a kid, never thought I would meet a Muslim. This was something entirely exotic in my mind. And then anytime I heard Palestinian, what word do you think was right after it all of those years when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s? Terrorist. Absolutely. That's all I heard and that's all I knew. Well, things radically changed about 5 years ago when my daughter, Maddie, who is now about to turn 27, she was finishing up at St. Olaf. I'm a St. Olaf grad too. And she was looking to be a part of the ELCA's Young Adults and Global Mission Program. And so I remember going down to northern Illinois with her, and we walked a labyrinth, and she was praying about where she might be sent. And it was between Rwanda and Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And she ended up being assigned to Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and that's where she went for a year. It was COVID year, so she wasn't there the entire time. And she was sent back. But she loved it. She loved the people there. She was in a little village near Bethlehem called Beit Sahur. And then she would travel into Jerusalem where there's a church called Redeemer. And that is kind of where the Lutheran Synod is centered. There are 7 Lutheran congregations in Jerusalem and the Holy Land. And there are about 2,000 Lutherans, and every single one of them are Palestinian. So it's important that we know that, a Palestinian Lutheran, and that's a great replacement for Palestinian terrorist in understanding who the people of the region truly are. So Maddie is living there now and working as a communications officer for the bishop of that synod. And she has a Palestinian goddaughter who is the apple of all of our eyes. And she is set to come back to the United States probably in the end of July when someone else will take her position. She wants to continue on in graduate school. But she's there now. And she's one of those, when you see a statement coming out of the ELC-JHL, she's probably had a hand in writing it. She has many friends who are impacted by this war, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish as well. And so being of her age group too, this is the issue of their time, really. And it has become the issue of my time as well. And I think that it's important for all of those of us who are also ELCA folks of a certain age or older to really unpack how is it that we got the notions that we have. Part of them is as simple as this name Israel. When we see that in our hymns that were written in the 1800s and so on, realize that that part of the map was not labeled Israel yet. Israel is 76 years old. And so that's just one little piece of understanding and untangling what's going on there. So I'm going to leave it there for now.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Is this too harsh? Should I lower it a little? Is that better? Okay. Okay, we'll try. I could lower it some more. I'm pretty tall. First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming. Thank the pastor of Mount Olive Lutheran Church for having us here. This is obviously a very challenging time for all of us, and it was and it has been, very heartwarming for me as someone who was born in Palestine, to be able to come here and to interact, particularly with individuals of other faiths, Christians and Jews, where we actually share in our common humanity, recognizing the humanity of all people. I want to just give you maybe a little bit of background about myself. I actually was born in Palestine, in the area that is now called the West Bank. It used to be, before all the checkpoints came up, it used to be a 15-minute drive, 10 to 15 minutes actually, from my town to Jerusalem. I've been lucky. I've been to Jerusalem because I still have family there. My in-laws are there. Your in-laws are in another country. It's always, you got to go visit them. They're really nice in-laws. I'm always happy to go through the streets of Jerusalem, not only to visit the Muslim sites. I've been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on multiple occasions. I traveled to Bethlehem, been to the Church of the Nativity, been to Nazareth. All of these are towns that are largely Palestinian. You go where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is, they're Palestinians. It's in the Old City. You go to Bethlehem, they're Palestinians. You go to Nazareth, again, although the Israelis are trying to take sections in Upper Nazareth, but they're Palestinians there as well. I happened to come to the United States with my mom. I was still a toddler. We came to visit, at that time, my dad. My grandfather came to this country a long time ago. And then my dad, when he was 16 years old, actually came to be with his dad. He wanted to finish high school here. About less than a year after he came, my grandfather passed away. He's buried in Milwaukee. And my dad completed his high school. At that time, it was West Division High School in Milwaukee. Then he was drafted into the military. He did his basic training at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. He was a medic, and he served for several years. Eventually went back, got married to the person who became my mom. And when we came to visit here, it was prior to the 1967 war. My younger sister was born a couple days before the Israelis occupied the West Bank and Gaza and other areas. We weren't allowed to go back during the war. And after the war, we were declared absent, meaning, hey, you don't belong there anymore. Even though we were born there, we have family there, we have roots there, relatives there, properties and lands there, we were told you cannot go back. And the reason you cannot go back is because there were laws. The Israeli law of return of 1950 or 52, only applied if you were Jewish, not if you were anything else, whether Christian, Muslim, anything else. And so that was the problem, that here you had people who had lived there. Many had been forced out of their homes, both during Israel's creation. One thing I should mention when we talk about Gaza, and I know we're going to get to this issue, about 80% of the people that live in Gaza are not indigenous to Gaza. In other words, that's not where their home was for decades or longer. Overwhelmingly, 80% of the people of Gaza lived in the part that is now called Israel. Not the West Bank and so forth, just in the part that became Israel following 1948. So when you hear that there were 500 Palestinian towns and villages that were destroyed and that the people were evicted, they were either fled or forced to flee, and not allowed to return now for over 75 years, many of those people were forced to go to Gaza because that was the only place that was available to them. Now imagine, Gaza was under the control of the Israeli government when it was occupied in 67, and it stayed under Israeli control until they pulled out from inside Gaza and controlled the outside. But all of these are things, I'm not going to go through all of the history, but all of these are things that we who were Palestinians, who grew up, this is what I grew up with. My parents were always talking to us that, hey, this is the land that you came from. You were evicted from there. I grew up and then became active because of the tragedy, honestly, that the Palestinian people suffered. And I will say clearly, I am one of the lucky ones. Finished school here in the United States, went to college in the United States, went to law school in the United States, then worked as now executive director of an organization, very comfortable, happy, but I'm not like the millions of Palestinians who are living in Gaza or Lebanon or Jordan that were evicted from their homes and against international law are not allowed to return to their homes except for the fact that they're Palestinian, whether, again, Christian, Muslim, whatever. And so when Palestinians have this key, you oftentimes see Palestinians carrying this big key. The idea is, this is the key to my home that I want to return to. Now, whether we choose to return, I myself, I'm very comfortable. My kids grew up here. We've become this part of our culture and whatever. I'm still proud of my heritage, but most likely would never choose to go back myself. But I have to have that right, which is an international legal right, not for myself, but for others who, like those living in Gaza, the poor people who are suffering like no other people on earth are now suffering. They have the right, and this is a conflict that needs to be resolved. We shouldn't have had this war, shouldn't have had October 7th. There was a lot of things that happened before October 7th, including in 1948 and afterwards. Those are all things that, had there been international law that is followed, had our government, my government, which here, and again, I'm equally upset at either party, had they taken the tough decisions, upheld international law rather than catering to special interests and groups and lobbies and maybe just supporting things that was driving them for whatever reason. Had they done the right thing, followed the principles that our country was founded on, and I believe what most people in this country truly believe in terms of fairness and morality and ethics, we would not be in the place that we're in. I'm sorry, I may have gone over a little.
You're good, thank you. And before you pass it on to Jess, Altman's statement about the occupation, all of us who are white and have the privilege of being in this basically white country, we do so because we live on the land that we've occupied. And I grew up in Oklahoma, the home of the 5 civilized tribes, which were displaced from the East Coast. And every time I hear your story, I think about the story of classmates I had when I was a kid, and hearing that over and over. It's just a different place in the world. So we understand that here in the United States. We understand what displacement is and the troubles that causes. So every time you tell your story, I just reminded of that. So thank you. Jess, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Jess Annabelle. I grew up here in Milwaukee for the most part. I grew up in Whitefish Bay. I'm a Jewish American. I don't have the extraordinary historical knowledge and scriptural knowledge of my co-panelists here, so I hope you'll be gracious with me as I do my best. Growing up here in Milwaukee as a Jewish American for me was very pleasant. I went to Jewish summer camp. We celebrated Hanukkah in our household. We celebrated all of the different holidays at school every year. But only 5 generations ago, my family is German Jewish. And so my specific branch of the family was already in New York in the 1930s and 40s in the Jewish Holocaust. But I also lost my great aunts, Bertha Gottlieb and Rosa Kastner and Sarah Poritz, all at Auschwitz in the Holocaust. They were all murdered in the later years of the Holocaust at Auschwitz, which is to say that if more people had done more things to stop the Jewish Holocaust sooner, more of my personal family would have been alive. And I think that has immediate and critical bearing on the situation in Gaza today. So many people have passed in the last months. And the more that we can do every single day to call for peace, the more people in our families would continue to be alive. In my faith tradition as a Jew, one of the core tenets of our faith is the idea of pikuach nefesh, which is the sanctity of saving a life. And as Jews, we have a number of religious laws, like all of us in all of our faiths. One that I particularly love is we keep Shabbat. So from Friday at sundown till Saturday at sundown, we don't work. And people interpret that with different degrees of strength. So very, very observant Jews would not turn on a light switch, is to create a fire, is to do a work, or would not drive a car, or would not write in a journal, because writing things together is to create a work. But this core value of pikuach nefesh, which is to save a life, is more important than any Jewish law. So if somebody needed to go in a hospital on Shabbat, was having a heart attack, you are actually commanded to break all other Jewish laws. It is a mitzvah and a blessing and a commandment to break every single law in our faith in order to save a life. And that guides me very strongly in my commitment to a ceasefire and Palestinian liberation. That is the core tenet, as I see it, of our faith as Jews, is to protect the value of human life.
Thank you. So we'll move on, and if you need to write down a question or something as you listen to our panelists, or just try to remember, because we'll have time to ask questions as we move along. The next question we wanted the panelists to work at and to speak to would be recognizing the long and fraught history of Palestine and Israel. How do each of you support your call for a ceasefire and permanent peace to those in your respective assemblies? How do you talk to folks in your group? And how do you talk to them when they seek direction as they deal with the tragedy they see unfolding in Gaza and the West Bank and Israel? How do you counsel?
I go first again.
Well, we could go down the line with Oldman. We'll just go that way unless you...
Sure,
Go ahead.
Okay. I think the most important thing when we look at our country, at least the ideals, is we're all equal. We have equal rights. And obviously, our country has gone through periods where that hasn't obviously existed. We're not always true to the ideals which our country was founded upon. But generally, as we continue to move forward, the idea is that all human beings are equal, and all human beings are endowed with their Creator with these inalienable rights. Human rights should be the most basic of all of those. As someone who comes from the Muslim background and from the Middle East, I mean, our history and our experience is very different than maybe some from other countries or backgrounds. Actually, Palestinians and others have a long, positive history with members of the Jewish community. And one of the things that I say outright to anyone, if you want to support the Palestinian cause, you support it because it is a just cause. If you support it because you happen to hate Jews or things of that sort, I don't need your support, okay? I don't want your support. You go back under that rock or whatever that you came out from under, because we ain't interested in that. This is a human rights issue where people of different religious backgrounds have an agreement about the human rights. When you look at this problem, it's not, you know, some people say, oh, it's so complicated, it's hundreds of years old. It's not. This is a more modern conflict. If you go back and you look in history, even like some of the greatest Jewish scholars, Moses Maimonides, who wrote, he actually was born in Spain, eventually during they call it the Spanish Inquisition. I don't know why it's called Spanish. There wasn't anything Spanish about it. It was a different Inquisition. But they were evicted from there and went to North Africa. And actually, Moses Maimonides eventually went to Egypt and even became the court physician of Saladin, or Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. I mean, he's the one who developed, you know, or derived the 613, the mitzvah, the principles of the Jewish faith. There was this interaction, this agreement, this pluralistic interaction between people of different faiths, including Muslims and Jews and Christians as well. When you look at that, there's nothing that should stop Muslims and Jews and Christians from being able to interact. If you go, or you had gone to Jerusalem, they were worshiping all in Jerusalem. I mean, the Muslims are right next to the Jews, which are right next to the Christians, and so forth. Sometimes there were maybe more conflict between different denominations of the same faith than there were between people of different faiths. But people were able to get along. And They respected each other's, humanity. The problem is when any group feels that they have a special place that's above everyone else. You could be Muslim, Christian, Jewish, it doesn't matter. That's where you run into then the problem and the conflict. And so I believe that the way to move forward is that you don't have this idea of giving one people a special privilege over another. It's to give people equal rights. You treat them as equal, you regard them as equal, you work with them as equals, and that is how we should move forward. If you start saying we should, no, one people have a privilege, and again, this is especially when it comes to, Lisa mentioned about, the Scofield Bible, it's like, once you start saying God is a real estate agent and God is doing things in a certain way. I mean, the other day I was listening to a elected representative from Georgia, where he was asking someone from one of these college chancellors or whatever, and he says to her, again, I'm summarizing, but basically says, do you know that in the Bible it says that those who curse Israel are going to be cursed? Now, I think this guy thought Israel in the Bible was Israel the state.
And that's a problem.
Okay. I mean, I'm a Muslim and I know that ain't right. I mean, there's Jacob, he's called Israel, okay, and that's what they're talking about. There was no state. And yet, he then turned to her and he says, do you want us to be cursed? And it's like, do you know what the hell you're talking about? Excuse my language. Maybe I shouldn't say that in a church. I'm sorry. Anyways, I apologize about that. The issue of all of us, as part of our faith traditions, we look at others as being God's children. I mean, all of us are God's children. All of us have, the human rights, and we may sometimes believe different things. We may follow different paths. We may do different things. But as humans, as what God has given to all of us is the same. And for me to say that I should do this to you, or God gave me this and that way you can't have that, this is a problem. Again, I'm not saying that everyone should believe the same thing. Again, I want to be very clear about that. We have different religions. God created us that way. I mean, we have different faiths. We have, you could be in the same family and you have different opinions. But the essence of who we are as human beings, for human rights, the rights that we have, that we are given by God, and I'm saying this in a church, that God gave us, I strongly believe that these are rights that were given to us by God. And for someone to say that, we are maybe children of a lesser God, is that what we are? Is that what the religion should say? That some people are lesser, children of a lesser God, or somehow less than others? I don't believe that God would ever say something like that. At least not the God that I think most of us believe in.
Thank you. Jess, you ready to go?
Sure. Yeah, I think you've both made this point very beautifully already, but something that's really important to understand is Judaism is a 6,000-year-old faith. So for us, in our tradition right now, the year is 5784. It is 6,000 years that Jews have been practicing Judaism and keeping the commandments in the Old Testament, the same Old Testament across all of our faiths. And the nation state of Israel is 76 years old. So that is 1% of the duration of our history as a people, as Jews. This is a very, very modern conflict. So when we talk about, this long and fraught history and, Muslims and Jews have been there forever and all this conflict, it's just not true. The state of Israel, after the Six-Day War, comes into existence in 1948, strongly supported by Europeans who wanted to get rid of the Jews, which is not a good reason to start something. And that is not our faith tradition in the least. So that's the timeline. I think that's critical to understand. And then, too, we have to make this difference between faith and politics. So Jews practice the religion of Judaism. And the same way that I trust and expect in many of your families and many of your congregations, you have both Democrats and Republicans, I imagine. We, too, have people in our faith community who support the Zionist and colonizing project that is the State of Israel, where it was pretended that a land was empty of people so that Jews could be relocated there, in no small part motivated by anti-Semitism. Likewise, we have people in our faith community, tens of thousands, and hundreds of whom have been arrested at the encampments in the last months, who are Jewish, for whom Zionism and this colonizing project has never been a part of our faith, and have stood in strong opposition to that white supremacist and colonial project because it has nothing to do with our relationship between ourselves, our faith, and God.
A little bit more about that position and the connection and the development of what is called the Jewish Voices for Peace.
Jewish Voice for Peace is a national nonprofit organization, so all over the United States. I think we're at least 10, 20 years old, and it is Jewish people across the United States and some around the world who've been calling for peace in the state of Israel and Palestine and absolute and equal rights, including and especially freedom of movement. So Palestinians who did populate the land that is now called Israel until 1948, and whose land has been increasingly controlled by the state of Israel from 1948 to 67 to 76 to today, have no freedom of movement. The same way, and again, please correct my history, but the same way that you or I will all after this get into our cars, and if we so choose, we could go to the grocery store or to visit our friend's house or back to our own home. That is not the reality for Palestinian people in Gaza, which is largely an open-air prison. So if you are leaving, you are really probably likely not without a permit and through a checkpoint. Israel's been denying building permits to Palestinian families for the last decades. Israel regularly just rips up roads in their entirety. So there's no equal rights, equal sense of safety and peace, possibility, education, hope, or just simple movement. And that, again, is a specific nation-states program that tens of thousands of Jews worldwide, hundreds of thousands of Jews, don't support, of all varying degrees of observation of the Jewish faith.
Thank you. Okay, back to you.
Yeah, now I'm ready. First, though, on this last part that you were just talking about, freedom of movement in Palestine, there is a Lutheran Palestinian pastor who is married to a woman who is expecting her first child in July, and they have differing permissions for where they can go and when. So the woman who is pregnant is not able to travel across a line to see her own mother prior to the birth of this baby, and has to stay in one place so that she can stay with her husband instead. So it's just, there's this amazing number of complications that I think some Lutherans who traveled there had a sense of, seeing the walls and hearing about these things, and we were just starting to learn about that, and now we're in this state of war. If you travel, when you travel to the Holy Land, please use a Palestinian guide and insist upon that. Okay, so there's something special that I want to say, particularly to Lutherans. And since many of you are Lutheran here, I need to say this, and it's kind of a hard word. When, just a few days after October 7th, on our Synod listserv, a pastor said, "We don't have any right to say anything about what the state of Israel is doing in response to the attack by Hamas, because we were complicit during the Holocaust, and during that time, German Lutherans did not do nearly enough to stand up. With the exception of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, we were silent. And that's part of the reason why there are so many of your relatives who are not living in their generations that are cut off. So we don't have any right to say anything to criticize the state of Israel. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't silence ourselves now. The other part of the piece of the puzzle that I think a lot of us have been told or tell ourselves is that we did a good thing, we Christian Americans, by participating through the United Nations in the creation of the State of Israel as a reward for the sufferings, I know this is hard to hear, the sufferings of the Jewish people during the Holocaust and World War II. Not knowing or not thinking that there were already people living there, and also, or not caring, and also not realizing that the reason there was no safe place was because largely of the European Christians and their deeply, deeply cultivated anti-Semitism. So all of that is a part of our heritage, and also today is today. A ceasefire is needed today. There are children dying today. And so then we need to go to what is the center of our faith, Jesus Christ. And what was Jesus' ministry like? To whom did he reach out and talk? And whom did he extend grace to? Everybody and anybody. He was not a specialist in that. Are the kind of values that were heard just here about the equality of God's love and care for every created child of God is true from the Christian perspective as well. And if we are Christians, beware of those who call themselves Christians, they're Christian nationalists or Christian Zionists, who spend a whole lot more time interpreting the Old Testament and its geography, which does not comport to what the map says now, rather than leaning into the goodness and grace of Jesus. There, that's what I wanted to say. And a ceasefire has to happen now.
Thank you. Well said. That is a part of our Lutheran Christian background that we must own. But it does
And move on. Yes.
But it does not give us an excuse to not be active now. So thank you for those comments. Let's move on to the third question that I have for you. And that's to reflect in your tradition about the dogma, the scriptures, the doctrines that teach people have that right. You've talked about it a little bit already in terms of your view of Jesus, Pastor Lisa. But what about this right to a democratic participation in the life of a community, in a land that all this history, all these cultures claim as holy? How is it that you find hope in your background, in your holy books, to find hope that this could be a land for everybody? And we're going to go down the line and start with you, Jess.
So again, I am not a religious scholar. So when I was thinking about this question, how I wanted to answer it, what I thought of was Abraham and his two sons. So Abraham has his son Isaac and his son Ishmael. Ishmael, and I think all of our faith traditions, is widely considered to be the father of the Arab people and so the Muslim people. So we're cousins, is what I turn to when I think about Scripture. And I've had the profound and extraordinary experience to have such a diverse social circle in my life. So one of my best friends was Saudi growing up. One of my close friends in high school here in Milwaukee is part Lebanese. We traveled to Lebanon in 2012 to help him find some of his family who is still living there, because I speak some Arabic and he does not, so he needed a translator. I lived in Morocco for 6 months of my life. When I was in Chicago for the Jewish Voice for Peace protests, we shut down the Israeli state building in Chicago for a day as a protest. My cab driver on that trip was Palestinian. And anytime I interact with my Muslim friends and family, all of my Muslim friends and family are like, oh, we're cousins. And that's what I turn to when I think about scripture too, is we are cousins. And so I would not treat anyone of any faith tradition any different than I would treat my own cousin or my own brother. And that's what I turn to when I think about that.
Your turn, Lisa.
From the, some of you were at Redeemer today for worship, and the book of James, the Epistle of Straw, the letter of James, chapter 3, verse 18 says, "And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." And of course, Jesus also said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." And so it's not that I think our tradition says that there should be such and this, and the real estate should be divided in such a way. No, it's just that we are called to be peacemakers in all of this, and at least not warmongers or not contributing to war. And so I think that's really, it's that simple, is that each person is created by God, and the politics or the political, the democratic process, all that kind of flows from that, that basic insight. Now, again, as Lutherans, you know that we have this two states doctrine, which says that we are to be participants fully in the life of the church and our religious life and our faith life, and also responsible participants in the democratic processes or the governments to the extent that they are on the up and up. And when they are not on the up and up, to call them out. So that is also a part of our heritage. And so while no Lutheran pastor should ever tell you for whom to vote from the pulpit, they will tell you and urge you to vote. I don't know for whom I will vote this fall. I really don't. And so I'm searching my heart about that and praying about it quite a bit as well. I think I'll leave it there.
Okay.
You know, there's a verse in our scripture that says that God had created people into nations and tribes so that they can actually know and work with one another. And then it says that the best among them are the righteous. Okay? It didn't say the best among them are this person or this community or whatever. It's those who are righteous. And we know, we believe also that God, if God had wanted to create all of us to believe the same thing, to act the same way, to uphold everything in the same way, we would all be the same. God gave us free will. God gave us intelligence, a mind. And God just encouraged us to do what is righteous. And so I think people need to ask, is it okay to occupy other people's land? Is it okay to evict them and to continue this eviction over, kind of a slow eviction over 75 years, to build settlements on their lands, to deny them their rights, to engage in collective punishment and occupation for 75 years? And this is actually taking it now a step further. When water and food and basic health care is denied to an entire civilian population, including children, is there any religion that says that that's okay? Every hospital has been destroyed. Every university in Gaza has been destroyed. 150 journalists have been killed. Now, these are not Western outside journalists, because Israel does not allow any outside journalists to go in, and we know why, because a journalist would have to report on atrocities, and maybe the existence of journalists would prevent atrocities. So all 150 journalists that have been killed are journalists that are Palestinian working for other news agencies. How many doctors, physicians, nurses have been killed? Just a few days ago, they reported that one of the top orthopedic surgeons who had been taken in by the Israelis in December was now dead. He was imprisoned. Why are we killing physicians? Why are we going in and killing medics, bombing ambulances? Why is it that we deny these people basic things, food, water? I mean, those are considered war crimes under international law. How do you move 1.5 million people, force them out of their homes, and then they're going from one place to the other, claiming that these are safe zones? I mean, we're hearing on the news, and again, I mean, I don't know what your views are about Al Jazeera, but Al Jazeera is reporting 24/7 what's going on there. They are some of the people who hired the Palestinians on the ground. They say that this, and I consider it to be a genocide, it's the first genocide that is being live streamed. Go onto Instagram or go onto one of these social media, and you will see every single day the people that are being killed, and it's being live streamed. We're watching it. We're seeing the kids being pulled out of the rubble. We're seeing the families being pulled out. We're seeing the dead. We're seeing hundreds of bodies that are wrapped, shrouded in white cloth. When Israel had gone in and raided one hospital and recently pulled out, and they're finding hundreds of bodies, including bodies with their arms zip-tied behind their backs, dead, they still have cannulas and other medical equipment in their arms. Physician shot in the head. Okay? I mean, this is not Judaism. This is not...
And it's not defense.
It's not defense. I mean, why is this going on? Is this any religion, anyone of any faith can actually accept or tolerate this or stay silent due to it? I personally don't believe any religion, and that's why I'm sitting here with my colleagues, friends here, because I don't believe that our religions would accept anything like this. And those who do accept this or promote it or support it, I believe that they have a very, very skewed understanding of their own tradition.
Thank you. You get a sense of the values that our panel have as they share their story. It reflects our understanding of being faithful people, created in the image of God, that we might share in this world a goodness that we can see, really, in each other, right? See in each other's face. But there is conflict, and there is war, and there have been over 14,000 children killed, and there have been over 35,000 people murdered in Palestine, and the war continues. And are we complicit as United States citizens? That's what we ask ourselves. And so we bring our faith traditions to that question. And how do we act? And we have an opportunity to discuss that a little bit. And like I said, we have time now for questions and answers for our panelists. I'm very grateful that you all took time on a beautiful Sunday afternoon to come here and to share your story and your perspective. And I would like to take time now to listen to your questions and have a dialogue from your perspective as you speak to our panelists. Is there anybody who has a question they'd like to share right away? Okay. Walk over here. I'll get everybody.
Okay, from your different perspectives, we keep saying free Palestine. Honestly, I can't say that I have a vision of how that would work, because it kind of seems, well, one side did this, another side did that. So how moving forward can we say, wipe it clean, this is how we're going to free Palestine, and, you know, grow with love for everyone, regardless of your background, your religion, etc.
I was just thinking about that too when you were speaking, it's like, so what to do with these horrible atrocities? And I think when I counsel people in my communities, I often say, like, what comes naturally to you? So many of us love to cook. One great way to support the encampment is by bringing food. So many of us are such strong political actors and so involved. An amazing thing to do in terms of urging for a ceasefire is to call your reps every single day. If you don't like to call, email. If you don't like to email, text. Another amazing thing to do is answer honestly the questions of people around you in your own life who maybe don't have as much experience and haven't heard the diversity of voices here. So education. Another thing I strongly, strongly urge is there are hundreds of fundraisers online from people in Palestine trying to get to safety from their families. I still have the letters from my family in 1938 begging for 25 pounds for a visa to the US. My family died. Please, you can go online on GoFundMe. There are hundreds of Palestinian families asking for help with immigration right now. We should be supporting those fundraisers. So I would say all of these small actions that we can take today and this week, take all of them. All of the small actions you possibly can, and all the small actions that come naturally to you. And then in terms of the bigger picture, you know, there too, I'm not a politician. I would turn it to God. Like, Jewish and Muslim people have been living peacefully and comfortably with one another all over the world for centuries and for millennia. So absolutely, we can live as comfortably and peacefully with one another right here on this stage as we could in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv. I believe that's possible because it is our lives. We're seeing it. Thank you.
Other responses from you two?
I think if the impulse is for us in Wisconsin to come up with a way that Palestine can be free and that everyone there can live together peaceably, I think it's a good time for us to sit out, because we've done that too many times, trying to write out a script for how people in another country halfway across the world ought to live. But I think we should be prayerful and intentional and do all of the things that you just mentioned, and do travel there and learn and see, but to support the people there to determine how they will live equitably with one another. Now, there's a complication to this, and I think Othman will probably talk about that. How is that possible after what's been going on? I mean, how is that possible to build back a kind of trust between peoples after what's happened? So anyway, Othman, I'll let you pick up on that if you wish.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I agree with what's being said, and I guess maybe partly because my own legal background, we're a nation of laws. If someone commits a crime, you hold them to account for it. There are laws on the books that says this is the way that we solve it. When it comes to what's going on right now with the Palestinians and the Israelis, there are already international laws, including laws that the United States government is signatory to, about how to resolve the problem. In the law, it talks about in the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war, talks about the right of refugees, if they are forced or if they fled because of war, to return to their homes. It talks about not bringing your own people into occupied lands and so forth. But the US government is not implementing the laws. since October 7th, there's been, I think, 3 or 4 votes in the United Nations. The entire world is on one side, and the United States government vetoes it in support of Israel. We want to end the war? No. We want to call for a Palestinian state? No. Let me just talk about this one issue about calling for the Palestinian state. And honestly, I mean, when you talk about a free Palestine, you could call it Free X, okay? I don't care what you call the country, but you give people equality in that country. I don't care what the name of the country is, but you give people equality in that country. What the Palestinians are told as part of all these negotiations that have been going on, the U.S. government that says that we're the honest broker, which we're not. You know, when remember, our Congress just passed how many $1 billion to Israel? $1 billion. This is in addition to the arms that we give them. 70% of the arms used in Gaza to kill Palestinians are from the United States. Okay? Our tax money is committing genocide. Let's be clear about that. The money that we use is used by our government representatives to fund Israel's war. What the Palestinians are told, oh, if you want to have a peace solution, we're not going to go and look at the laws and say, let's enforce these laws. They're telling the Palestinians, no, you need to sit down with the Israelis and negotiate a truce. Imagine if someone robbed your home and you go before a judge and the judge says, we're not going to enforce the law. Why don't you, who just robbed this house, who's armed and funded and everything else by me, and is much more powerful than you, you go negotiate with them the terms of the truce. Why? It's like asking a woman who's been raped to go negotiate with her rapist. Is that the way the world should work? Why aren't we enforcing laws? When Israel says for many years that, oh, we talked about a two-state solution, okay? And just quickly, when Israel was created, and after the 1948 war, Israel controlled 78% of Palestine. What was left was the West Bank and Gaza, and that represents 22% of Palestine. As part of the Oslo Accords, which are now more than 30 years old, the PLO, the representative at the time, and the Palestinian Authority said, we are willing to accept the 22%, and we will forego the 78%, but we want the 22%, including East Jerusalem for our capital, and we don't want the illegal Israeli settlements in this Palestinian state, because they're illegal. Well, guess what? In the past 30 years, Israel has continued to take more than half of that 22% to build settlements, roads for these Jewish extremist settlers that are roads only used by Jews, and they've whittled down the land area that the Palestinians have in the West Bank. There's no Hamas ruling in the West Bank. How could you have a Palestinian state when you have now, it's all broken up and you can't do it? Israelis, scholars, professors, leaders have said there is no chance that there's a Palestinian state anymore because the Israeli governments in their building of settlements have made it impossible. And so what's the option that's left? One state. Who's opposed to one state? Israel. Why are they opposed to one state? Because if you have one state, you have to give equality to all those Palestinians. And all those Palestinians, if they become equal to you, will say, I don't want to live in an apartheid discriminatory state. So now you've foreclosed the two-state solution. Because of your supremacist ideas, you don't want the one-state solution. And so what's the only solution that the right-wing Netanyahu government is supporting? how do we get rid of the Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza? And that's what's taken place. When we talk about this incremental genocide, that is what's taken place. And I'll just end here. If you want to read a good book from a Jewish author about how Palestinians were evicted, there's a professor, his name is Ilan Pappé, P-A-P-P-E. He wrote a book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Take a look at that book from a Jewish, former Israeli perspective. He may still maintain his citizenship, I'm not sure. If you want it from a Palestinian side, there's Professor Rashid Khalidi, believe it or not, from Columbia University, who wrote a book called The 100 Years' War. He's a very well-known Palestinian scholar. Okay? Read those books and many others and get some information. But from the Middle East, from Palestinian point of view and from the rest of the Middle East, and actually I would even say from the rest of the Muslim world, everybody knows Israel would not be able to do what it's doing if it were not for our government. When people say, why are people upset at us? When we support the killing of 15,000 children, when 70% of the people are women and children, when Gaza has been obliterated and we're witnessing it before our eyes, and our president, whether Republican or Democrat, says Israel has a right to defend itself. And when do the poor Palestinians have a right to defend themselves? And when do they have a right to be free of occupation and oppression that's been existing now for decades? Did anyone ever ask? You know, all these people who are now talking about, oh, you know, we're creating all this anxiety and false accusations of anti-Semitism against Palestinians. Did you ask these people who are making those claims, where have you been for the last 75 years? This Jewish Federation, have you ever made a statement against the occupation, collective punishment, torture in prisons, murder of children, children being imprisoned? Take any of 100 different human rights violations. Have you, as a federation who claims to represent the Jewish community, have you ever taken a position for decades? They haven't. And I think that's why many from the Jewish community, out of principle, saying, these people don't represent us. Not Israel and not their mouthpieces in the United States. Our tradition is not what Israel is doing or what the supporters of Israel is saying. And for me as a Palestinian, these are our allies. These are our allies.
When I hear the words from the river to the sea, every time I'm at the encampment over at the university or any of the demonstrations and vigils that we've had, I hear the voice from other siblings of faith who say that means that's an anti-Semitic statement. They're taking our land away. And I think that Oltmann was saying very clearly, from the river to the sea means that we share a land. That every human being has a right there. Equally. And that's the hope. That's the hope that our democracy is trying to build, right? That everybody in this land has a right to it. I mean, it's a work in progress. And just as the United States isn't there, it's going to take a while for Palestine to get there. But this is what we mean when we say these things and hope for and work for, that everybody has an equal chance at that land. Another question, and I saw one hand over here.
Thank you, and thank you, the three of you, for being here. My question is, only once, maybe twice today, have I heard the word Hamas. And I'm just wondering, you know, what is the thought there? You know, October 7th was real and scary, right? Are we at a place now thinking that, is this what Hamas wanted to have happen? What do we do about Hamas now? Where's the answer there? What is your thought on that?
I'll answer this.
Good question. Thanks, Alderman.
No problem. We don't see the problem as being Hamas. I'll be honest. Not to say that we support Hamas, not to say I agree with Hamas, but the problem has been the occupation. There would be no Hamas if there was no occupation. Hamas would not have existed in Gaza if Gaza was not under siege for 17 years. When you don't provide people the legal means, legitimate means, peaceful means to express and espouse their rights, they're going to turn to violence. And this has happened, and we know throughout history. I mean, look at the African National Congress when you had apartheid South Africa. ANC was considered to be a terrorist organization. Okay, why? Because they were resisting the apartheid system. Well, was the apartheid system a terrorist system? Well, I believe it was a terrorist system. But why was it only those who resist who are labeled as terrorists? Now, do the ones who represent the victims, should they be the ones that are penalized for selecting a violent means of resisting, or should it be the ones who are occupying them? And again, we keep talking about, and I know October 7th. Let me tell you, in the 17 years that the Gaza Strip has been under siege, go back to just 2014. 2014, Israel went into Gaza and killed over 2,000 people, more than the number of people killed on October 7th. Why wasn't there no outcry at that time? Are they not human beings as well? There were children, more children killed in just that attack by itself than any other time. I'll give you another example. The Palestinians in Gaza started a movement called the Palestinian March, called the Palestinian Right of Return March, where, because Gaza is like a concentration camp. It's called a prison, but prisoners, the reason I don't like calling it prisoners is because like prisoners are assumed to have done something wrong. They didn't do anything wrong, okay? They were just forced into this land. So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these Palestinians went to the border fence, and imagine, now again, I just want you to imagine, you're standing there looking into the land, the orchards, the fields that you lived on, your towns and villages that you have now been living in this godforsaken territory, this, I mean, almost uninhabitable land, and you're looking at these people for the last, all your life, that are occupying your land, and you can't go back there. Okay? What happened in this Palestinian right of return is the Palestinians started approaching the fences with flags peaceful, no weapons, no nothing. What do you think happened? They were gunned down. They picked them off, the snipers. There's a Jewish director, Abby Martin. She has a film, you can find it on YouTube, but what is it called?
Is it called Gaza?
I think Gaza, something Gaza. But again, it talks about it was a peaceful protest. I don't know if you remember, there was a 19 or 21-year-old medic, a beautiful young girl, that they did a story about her, that she was shot by a sniper. And then Abby Martin actually showed some of these snipers cheering as they were picking off these unarmed people. What did the Palestinians have to do? Reason that Palestinians will not just go straight out and condemn Hamas is because they say, okay, you know what? Well, I'll condemn Hamas. I want you to first condemn Israel. Okay, and I'll give you an example of this. During the 1990s, there were some suicide bombings and whatever that were occurring by Palestinians inside Israeli towns. I, as a representative of an Islamic organization, came out and condemned it. And I challenged the Jewish community, the Jewish Federation, not people like Jewish Voice for Peace, but the Jewish Federation and others. I said, I challenge you to condemn what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, because it was during the uprising, and they were, again, basically killing children and whatever else. Total silence. again, it's not, and I will tell you, most people don't support Hamas or their ideology. I'll be upfront about it. When Hamas won the elections back in 2006, we talk about one of the oldest, Israel just recently, during this war, bombed one of the oldest churches in Christendom, that exists actually in Gaza. So there's Christians in Gaza. Christians voted for Hamas. Okay, there are many reports about that. Why would a Christian vote for Hamas? It had nothing to do with Hamas's ideology. It's that Hamas is seen as resisting the brutality of Israel, and unlike the PLO, which was seen as corrupt and their leaders were corrupt, Hamas at that time was seen as, hey, you know what, they're not as bad as the Palestinian Authority. That's internal Palestinian politics. But I guarantee you, if the people had their own independent state, the Palestinians, and they had the right to be free, there's no such reason to have a group like Hamas. Because their reason to exist would no longer be there. But as long as Israel and their occupation and their brutality exists, the Palestinians have a right to resist. And according to international law, people under occupation have the right to resist, including by arms. Now, they can't kill civilians or whatever, but Israel is not supposed to kill civilians either, and we're just sending them $20 billion.
I want to say a couple of things that I think are reflective of some Christian thought that I have heard as well. So I'm just going to speak it out loud. It's not pretty. But I think sometimes that American Christians, in their lack of knowledge, and this was me 5 years ago, are looking for the perfect victim, the most virtuous victim. And so you'll see another trope is the child with the slingshot and the rock and throwing rocks. And that if they throw rocks, well, then it makes sense that they would be gunned down. That does not make sense. That a child would lose their life because they threw a rock. Think it through. And I think that happens also, and it filters into our thinking about October 7th as well. Of course those murders were horrendous. Of course people's lives are upended and the mourning is deep. And we can't celebrate what happened on October 7th. We can understand it. We can understand what has happened. Nobody needs to defend it or celebrate it.
Thank you for those answers. I have a friend who's a student at Columbia University. I think she's a sophomore now, and she's Jewish, and she grew up in a conservative Jewish home, and her family practiced, and she went to Columbia, and the war started, and Columbia now is a hotbed of students, people of that generation, saying we've got to ask questions and think about what we're doing. And she said her evolution was kind of like yours, Jess, in the terms of where she's at, finding a common humanity. And she struggles because she doesn't feel safe. Not because of the encampments, but because she doesn't, as a Jewish person, submit to the way Israel is moving, then she feels persecuted. So she's kind of torn, but there's this thin line she's trying to walk. And it all has to do with, because we treat each other in inhumane ways. If we live in occupied territory, we do have a right to resist. If we do have an opportunity to speak out, we should do that. That's the way we human beings should act, and that's how our faiths encourage us to act, I think. One more question before we have a break and go back and have something to eat. Anything else, any other question that people want to ask? Saw a few hands go up. One more, okay.
I don't want to ask a question, but I do want to say that I think a lot of beliefs come out of fear sometimes. I remember, Pastor Lisa, you were talking about your experience in growing up, and I remember my mom telling me that she had a conversation with a pastor. I was probably about 8. I'm 70 now. And she was saying that this pastor said to her, the biggest danger in this country, in the world, is the Muslims. Well, I heard that from the time I was little, and I guess what I want to say too is just to encourage people, no matter what age you are, is to push yourself out of your comfort zone sometimes. My previous church, now I go to Pastor Lisa's church, but my previous church took in 3 Afghan refugees. And so I pushed myself, and I thought, well, I don't speak their language. But I did get involved with them and tried to teach one man how to get his driver's license and went over. And what I found is I had never been in contact with a Muslim person before. I didn't know anything about that. But what my husband and I found is what wonderful, gracious, hospitable, funny people that were so just accepting and loving of my blundering, trying to communicate with them. And so I guess that's what I would encourage you and encourage anybody to say is just push yourself past your comfort zone, because you just find out that no matter what religious faith you are, what your background has been, don't judge a person till you've walked in their shoes. And when you do get to seek out other people and understand them, you really find that people are just beautiful people, and their cultures aren't anything to be afraid of, but they're something to embrace. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
No, to risk being human being, that's what you're saying. And thank you all for being here. There are refreshments in the room, in the fellowship room, at the other end of the building. And our panel will be here for a few more minutes if you'd like to have conversation with them as individuals and enjoy some refreshment. But thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Thank you to the 3 of you for taking the time to share today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right down the hallway.